Welcome to the show. This is CC Michael. You've stumbled your way into all things Alberta. This is take two. What you don't probably understand is that I was 15 minutes into the show when my microphone died, and when you have technical difficulties, that's the sort of thing that happens. So here we are, take two. Maybe the intro will be a little better this time. Try to improve on it. On today's show, we're going to cover a number of things. We'll probably go for almost an hour, depending on how long. I have an interview coming up. What I want to cover today is the COVID-19 update in Alberta. I am not the expert, and I'm not going to get into things you should and should not be doing, but I am going to have a few comments with regards to some of the things I'm seeing on social media out there. I'm going to talk about Alberta separation, one of the issues, one of the questions that Jonah brought up after episode 1 that I'm going to address. I wanted to get someone smarter than me on to address the question, but fact of the matter is, with everything going on, I work 2 jobs and still trying to do a show here at the same time. I'm having a little bit of trouble trying to connect with the kind of people that I want in order to answer those questions intelligently. So what I'm going to do is answer them as best I know how. Whether or not that's intelligent, make up your own mind. The issue that I'm going to be dealing with today with regards to Alberta separation is going to be the landlocked issue. I think there's some well, it's a good question. It's not like it's a dumb question. It's a good question, but I think there are some pretty basic answers that will go a long way to helping us out. Today I have the privilege of interviewing Pastor Jeff Jones from Grace Church of Cochrane. He's been a long-time pastor in the Calgary area. He wrote a paper. I don't know if you call it, I guess it was blogs. It was a 3 or 4 part blog. It's been a little while now. A 3 or 4 part blog on the question he was answering was, is Alberta the Bible Belt of Canada? This has been kind of the assertion that, at least here in Alberta, that we've heard lots of. When I did some work out in Ontario a number of years ago, there was sort of that opinion being expressed from people from Ontario to me as an Albertan, as a Westerner, that we're all a bunch of religious quacks out here. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are some, and I'm not even saying I might not be one of them. However, that is an ongoing assertion that Alberta is the Bible Belt of Canada. So Pastor Jeff did a great job of researching all of that and came to a few conclusions, and I want you to stick around for what he found, because I think you'll be surprised. And then finally, we're going to wrap up the show with just a couple closing remarks. So with that, let's dive in. The first thing I wanted to cover today was the COVID-19. The updates as of yesterday, I believe 3:30, was that there were 259 cases in Alberta, and so far only 1 death. And what we've seen is kind of a polarity of opinion on the COVID-19 issue. And it goes on the one side is that, and I hear this argument, and I covered it a little bit with the Vote Wexit. Eric covered it in episode 12, which he subsequently pulled, but I'm going to deal with that in my closing remarks, so we'll hang around for that. In which he asserted, and I've heard this from many people, I even heard it from Donald Trump 2 days ago, I believe, on CNN, when he brought up the idea that the flu numbers are far worse than the COVID numbers. And I thought, for a president, I don't ever wanted to defend Donald Trump. I don't want to defend anything in American politics. American politics are a mess. And so for those of you that are Trump lovers, you're going to hate this. For those of you that hate Donald Trump, you're going to love it. But the fact of the matter is, when he brought that stat up, I was pretty disappointed, thinking, for a president of the United States, you shouldn't cherry pick your numbers, which that's exactly what doing that is. You're taking one set of data that isn't even legitimate, because you can't take a year-long number. You can't say that there's between 22 and 55,000 deaths of the flu a year in the United States, but hey, so far we only have 1,200 of the COVID. Well, it's not over yet. So you can't even compare them. You don't know what you're comparing. And those are cherry picking your numbers. So regardless, with that sort of attitude comes a set of people that think this is no big deal. they even get to the point where it's all conspiracy theory. This is just to shut down the economy in the U.S. so somebody else can take over the world or whatever. They're taking it to that extreme in which they're basically dismissing the seriousness of the virus. And then you've got the other side, which the sky is falling, and that everyone needs to live in their mom's basement. They're not allowed to visit anyone. They should turn all the lights off because there's an environmental aspect to this whole thing. I wish I were kidding. This too is ridiculous. And so somewhere in the middle, we have to think clearly. And so that's what I'm going to, hopefully, as I talk, I've got, I don't know, 5 or 6 comments that I've seen that I want to address briefly regarding what I've seen. One more factoid before we get into the comments is that it appears, I ran the numbers 3 days ago, and it appears that the death rate for COVID-19, I should be more specific. COVID-19 appears to be 1.1% in the US and about 1.12% in Canada. And so no big deal, right? Well, the problem is that the flu has a death rate of 0.1%. So we're looking at a factor of 10. That's the issue. And that's why there's some validity to the point where people are talking about the sky is falling and we all need to live in our mom's basement and avoid each other and don't talk to each other and don't touch anything and on and on and on it goes, is because of that factor. It's a minimum factor of 10 from what we've seen. The other thing that we know, well, okay, the next two are unknowns, but they're best guesses, okay, from what I can find. This is an airborne disease, which is why you get it by breathing in the virus from somebody who is sick with it, which is why they're talking about having 2 meters separation between you and other people. And the fact that you should self-isolate, try not to get into groups more than 10, although some people are, like I said, I just like I saw Donald Trump talk about the numbers in one of his addresses, I saw another, I want to say he was an expert, but I don't remember. But it was someone on CNN talking authoritatively that this gentleman thought even being in groups of 5s was stupid. You should be in a group of 1, period. Well, we do know that it is predominantly, it looks like the science is showing it's predominantly airborne, that you breathe it in, it gets into your lungs, that's where you're in trouble. And the second is that it has, the infection rate is intermediate, meaning the spread, like how easily you catch it, appears to be an intermediate. I'll be honest, I don't know what intermediate means, but if I remember correctly, those viruses and whatnot are bacteria that are spread very difficult, are in a category of very low spreadability, meaning you gotta eat 10 pounds of dirt in an infected area before you might get it, whereas other viruses are far more contagious, whereas simple touch, touching, breathing, being in proximity, it has a long survivability rate, so a virus will stick on a counter, a doorknob or whatever, and will stay alive for 7 days. So lots of opportunity for other people to come along and get infected by it. That's not this virus. It is intermediate, meaning that if you, as far as I can tell, if you breathe in the virus from somebody who is in relative close proximity that coughs or sneezes or whatever, and you end up inhaling it, that's how you get it. So we need to be careful with regards to that. That's all I'm going to say about the virus itself. I've probably already given more of my opinion or information that is, I'm not an epidemiologist, so I'm a nobody, but that's from what I can gather, that's what I know. So there is some validity to the fact that we need to keep our distance. So here's the comments that I want to briefly talk about. The first one is that our health minister in Canada, who I just found out today when you look at her background, has absolutely no medical or scientific background whatsoever, which is pretty typical for a Trudeau government. No one knows what the hell they're doing. The idea is that this isolation thing could last months. And that's all fine and good. Except, here's the problem. When you have specialists like epidemiologists declaring that we need to flatten the curve and here's what we have to do in order to do it. They have a very specific goal in mind, and they haven't necessarily thought through the consequences of what that looks like with regards to every other area of life. There's a thing in science called a web. Everything touches everything else, right? And we see this in the social sciences. We see this in studies. Is you can't just do one thing and think that it's going to not affect everything else. And it's not necessarily that people aren't giving some sort of credence to how it's going to affect everything else, but they really don't understand the full ramifications because that's not their area of specialties. So in this example, and Doug Wilson covered this, I would suggest you go visit Doug Wilson, dougwills.com, I think, or if you go to Blog and Mablog, he wrote a blog, I think this morning, called something along the lines of "The White House Can't Panic," and here's why. And he talks specifically about the specialists versus the generalists, and how the specialists, and this is my words, not his, but the specialists can't see the forest for the trees. So in this case, the epidemiologists might be right. In order to flatten the curve, in order to keep the spread of the virus down, we all have to live in our mom's basement for 3 months and not talk or touch or do anything with anybody. What they don't understand is where the the economists come in. And the economists can go, do you have any idea what's shutting down the U.S. economy? In their case, in Doug Wilson's from Idaho, do you have any understanding what that's going to cost? And have we stopped and asked the simple question, can we afford it? And who's going to pay for it? This is a massive issue in which this whole idea of, it comes down to the economy versus saving lives. And no one is going to sit here and go, saving lives is dumb. We're going to have to just carry on. Life is normal. No one's saying that. As far as I could tell, no one's saying that. I'm certainly not saying that. But there is a question of what is it going to cost. For instance, Prime Minister Trudeau has already declared $82 billion specifically laid out to help ease the cost of people losing their jobs. I believe it was 3 days ago, last week, 500,000 Canadians applied for EI. 500,000. That's an outrageous number. That's an outrageous number. Who's going to pay for that? And that's a legitimate question. It's not like we can ignore that. It's going to cost. And $82 billion already on a very taxed and deficit spending government that we've had in power since Trudeau got in, we're in trouble. We're in financial trouble. And the idea that we can sustain this for months is unrealistic. So the question is how do we fix it? Is there a middle ground? Is there something we can do? Which brings us to, can we make the proper adjustments? Can our society, I know I've got a sister who is now working at home. I've got a number of other people that I know have been laid off. The vast majority of people I know have been laid off. That's the unfortunate part. But I do know that those that can work from home are working from home. Is this going to be a new thing? Are we going to maintain this to some degree? Are companies going to go, you know what, if you can work from home, you work from home, and from now on, you just work from home? Maybe this is a good thing in order to not move us forward, but change the way we do things. I think our lives have changed, much like I heard someone talk about the other day. 9/11 changed our way of life significantly, and COVID-19 is about to change our way of life significantly. Do we know what that looks like yet? No, but I think he's right. I think it is going to come to that. Fact of the matter is the short-term costs are huge already. And that the idea that this can carry on for months, I want to say the minister said upwards of 8 months. It's not sustainable. I don't care. It's not that I don't care about lives. I do care about lives. But we cannot sustain 8 months. And an economist needs to come along and go, yeah, that's great, but we can't all live in our basements for the next 8 months. It's not possible. Our countries, the world economy cannot handle that. So that's something to think about. Second thing that I wanted to comment on is the isolation versus life as normal. Now, when you're online, I know Twitter and Facebook are horrible places in order to see the goodness of people. You're not going to see it. However, it polarizes positions, and in this case, what I've noticed is that you've really got, it really emphasizes that we have two kinds of people. We have those that are introverts and those that are extroverts. Introverts, isolation sounds wonderful to them. Like, you mean I have to stay home and I'm by myself and this is their paradise. They're in their, they love it. Then you have your extroverts. This is going to drive extroverts crazy. Now, for me, I'm somewhere in the middle. I can go about 4 days in isolation and I'm fine. It doesn't bother me. But day 5, I start to go squirrely. And when you start to go squirrely, you suddenly start, your priorities change. You start making decisions based upon feeling rather than rational and reasonable. And you don't want that. And so there are extroverts, and I especially feel for the severe extroverts that just have to have people around them all the time. Like you downtown dwellers in downtown Calgary, downtown Edmonton, downtown anywhere. I don't know how you do it. I live in the country, and I live in the country for a reason. But generally speaking, you're going to get the extroverts that love being around people, love hearing the sounds of urban life, want to get out to the parks and rollerblade and do all these other things with other people. This is going to drive them crazy. And we wonder why we look out and see gatherings of people in Vancouver on the beach or in various other places. I can't even think of them. I know in Alberta there's a number. Edmonton, they've got the River Valley that's suddenly full of people. Calgary, they've got parks that are full of people. People are traveling out to the mountains, full of people, not distancing themselves, the rest of it. And there is all kinds of vitriol for those people. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be smarter. They should. But what I find disappointing is that for those of you that find it easy to isolate yourself and to stay at home for weeks on end and you're living your dream essentially, that people aren't like you. And this is very, very, very difficult for those that might be on the extrovert side that need contact with people and are desperate for that contact. I have seen things like just stay home. Hey, stupids, just stay home. Even Trudeau this morning threatened that we're going to lay down the law if people don't start staying home. Well, that's fine to say, but as an ex-pastor, when I had to deal with people and their sin, it's not at all helpful for me as a pastor to tell somebody who's crushed by sin to go, stop sinning. Oh, it's that easy, right? Oh, I just have to stop. Oh, well, on we go then. It's not that easy. And so what I'm trying to get across is that for those of you that are extroverts that are just dying at home, trying to get out, then this is how things go, right? So it's unfortunate. Do your best, but how about the introverts have some love and compassion for those that might be struggling with this. All right. Well, it looks like Pastor Jeff can join me now, so we're going to try this. Let's see how. I'm not a Skype guy, so this is going to be really interesting. I'm just going to invite him now. Make a call. As you can hear the music. I haven't done this in forever, so this is fun. I might hang up. I'm gonna Maybe he'll call me back. Anyway, we'll continue. So that was isolation and versus life as normal. Here's one that is, I find it somewhat humorous and sad all at the same time. There are people losing their minds on social media because Donald Trump keeps calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus. And people are losing their minds. And what's funny is that have they forgotten or do they care? I'm not sure why the vitriolic reaction, but Trump is known to be a master troll. He says that in order to troll people. It looks like we've got Pastor Jeff.
Hello, I can barely hear you.
You can barely hear me. How about now?
That's better.
There we go. I'll speak into the microphone. How's that? We are live. I was just in the middle of actually doing the show. I warned people you were coming. What I haven't warned people.
I warned them.
Yeah, I warned them you were coming. So what I didn't tell them is that I didn't tell you the questions I have for you. I basically did tell them that you did a study a number of years ago. Do you remember how long ago that was?
Well, you know what? It was long enough ago that I actually had to go back to my blog and read it again.
Okay.
It says 2014, so it's about 6 years old.
Okay.
It's a little dated, but I still stand by the basic thesis of it.
Right. Okay. And can you maybe just describe the thesis for our viewing audience here?
Yeah. So my essential argument was that although Alberta has a reputation of being a Bible Belt in Canada, and Calgary in particular has been described as the buckle of the Bible Belt, my basic thesis was that is untrue. It is instead an overgeneralization from a number of different factors in the Canadian political and social conversation, including there's some historical issues there. The Western Canadian tradition of populist uprisings contributed to it because many of those were led by evangelicals. Didn't necessarily represent an evangelical voting bloc in each case, but it was evangelicals who were very socially and politically active who led a lot of those. And you combine that with Alberta's strong cultural and economic ties to the United States, the ways those ties would be perceived within Canada as a whole, because Canada, especially central Canada, is quite suspicious culturally of the United States, and the overwhelming cultural influence and power of central Canada with its very progressive, very irreligious presuppositions just makes, when they look at a region that they think is more culturally conservative than them, it's easy for them to generalize from a few active evangelicals that, oh, we're all a bunch of Bible-thumping hicks out here. So I hope that helps a bit.
Well, you probably answered most of my questions, but we're going to go through. I wanted to start first, Jeff, with why did you ask the question in the first place? What made you dig into this?
Yeah, so just as background, I've been pastoring in the Calgary area since 2006. And I very quickly realized, because I'd spent a lot of time in Eastern Canada, my background, I joined the Army at 17 right out of high school, went to military college in Ontario, was posted to a big Army base in New Brunswick. That's where I met my wife. Still got lots of ties out to Eastern Canada. And so I spent several years out there, came back, and that, I think, gave me a bit of a perspective I didn't have before. And when I entered pastoral ministry in Calgary and started developing contacts throughout southern Alberta, the perception that I began to develop at that time, and which I still have, is that there's not a lot of us, and we need all the help we can get from other regions of the world. The problem, though, what you face is when it comes to church planting and mission work in Canada, is that kind of the the sexy places to go are the big cities. Calgary would be one of them. But places like Toronto, like Montreal, like Vancouver, and that not at all to deny the spiritual needs in those places. But my concern was that, and Alberta in general, our reputation as a Bible Belt would serve to dissuade some folks from making evangelical missionary investments in our region when we so desperately need them. And so I wanted to do some background work to kind of dismantle that myth a bit as part of a larger case for please come and help us. It's a Macedonian call, and that's part of the argument for it.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you did it, and I remember when you wrote those blog articles, and I read through them. I was not surprised at all. I was pastor at the time, so I saw what you saw, and
Yep.
On top of that, it's funny because I remember going all the way back to my elementary days where I first heard that I went to North Elementary School in Lower Fairview in Red Deer, Alberta. We used to call it Lower Harlem. It's not exactly the rich area of Red Deer. And so I remember hearing then about Alberta and I think at the time, more specifically, the Red Deer area, central Alberta, as being the Bible Belt of Canada. But the funny thing is out of all I had a small class. We only had about 12 or 15 kids in our class. It wasn't a very big school, and each grade was pretty small. But out of those 15, let's say, I remember one being a Baptist, and I remember one Jehovah's Witness. And that was it. I didn't know anybody else in the entire class. In my class, like I certainly was not a church-going Christian. I didn't grow up in a family that went to church. So I found it funny that even then, back then as an elementary grade school kid, that we're in the Bible Belt, yet I don't know very many people that are Christian. So I'm glad that you did the study. Before we go any further, I just want to make sure, where can people find this study if they want to go read it?
Yeah, the blog is still active. Probably the simplest thing to do would be the URL is jeffreyjones.wordpress.com. So Jeffrey, that's JEFFREYJONES.wordpress.com. Just go there, and in the search field at the top right, I think it is, just plug in Bible Belt or Bible Buckle or something like that, and you'll get the search results right there.
Right. Do you remember, is it a four-part blog you did?
5-part series. So
Five-part?
It started, as many things do with me, I tend to talk long, I tend to write long. So I started writing it, ran out of, my article was getting too long, planned a sequel, and then that turned into a 3-part series, and then a guy answered my first thing, and I added another. So it turned into a 5-part series at the end of the day. So warning to those who read it, it is long, but there's a fair amount of analysis in it, and I don't make any pretensions to be a professional historian or a professional political observer. I'm just a guy who's been working in pastoral ministry and has been in several places in the country, and I have to say my background moving around the country and even around Western Canada a bit gave me kind of a natural skepticism to the whole Alberta's the Bible Belt thing. I've seen Bible Belts elsewhere that were a little bit more, I think, cohesive than ours.
Right. So you might have touched on this already. I think you did, but just to make sure if there's anything I missed, I wanted to know where do you think that assertion of Alberta being the Bible Belt came from in the first place?
I think it grew over time. And so I think partly some of the roots historically may have been that as Alberta, Saskatchewan, even BC, as we were settled by folks largely coming out of central Canada. So these provinces were more heavily rural for a long time than the more urban centers in the eastern part of the country. More rural populations tend to track more conservative and more religious than urban centers in general. So I think there's a little bit of that. Just demographic reasons play a part in it. Then political history as well. There's evangelicals tend to be rather active people in community, and some of them go the political route as well. And so I think you get an outsized number of evangelicals active in the political scene anyway. It just so happened that a few of those folks rose to prominence in populist uprisings in Western Canada. Those people in your audience who may be less familiar with Canadian political history, the history of politics in Western Canada, and particularly Alberta, is really studied in populism. There's a long-standing history of populist uprisings, especially in Alberta, but with federal implications as well. The three big ones would be the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation back, I think that was the 20s and 30s, which eventually transmogrified itself into the modern New Democratic Party. But people may be surprised to learn the NDP, its roots were in a populist uprising in Western Canada, and they used to be a lot more, at least socially conservative than they are now. And they're the famous leader who in Saskatchewan who brought in single-payer Medicare here in Canada was a Baptist minister named Tommy Douglas. Now, my theological view is that he was a liberal Baptist minister back then, but he was still part of a general evangelical tradition. So there's that. Then the social credit movement followed that in Alberta and in BC. They formed government in both BC and Alberta. I can't recall if they did in Saskatchewan at all. Social credit parties wound up, they were a fixture of the political landscape up until the 90s, at least in BC, and I think the last people running as social credit were in the 2000s in Alberta. So they had a long run, but they formed government in Alberta under the leadership of a very interesting fellow, Bill Aberhart. He was called Bible Bill Aberhart for a reason. He was a very charismatic individual, and I said in the article in both senses of the term. Not only was he a personally very engaging speaker, that kind of charismatic, but he was theologically charismatic, like signs, wonders, speaking in tongues, all that stuff. And so he started his own little Bible school in Calgary, and he had his own Bible radio program. And he continued running this Bible program when he was in office as premier. So he's a very interesting fellow in Canadian political history, but he was premier of Alberta for quite some time. So a guy like that, being the leader of a province, that would have a lingering impact on people's political perceptions.
Right.
Especially since one of his proteges was a man named Ernest Manning, who became, as I recall, Alberta's longest-serving premier. Basically succeeded Aberhart. Basically, maybe that's not quite right. I don't remember the exact sequence of events, but Ernest Manning became premier, ruled for a long time, and one of Alberta's most impactful premiers. And his son then, a man named Preston Manning, wound up at the helm of the Reform Party movement, which was the third major populist uprising in modern Canadian political history. That was a populist movement out of the West, which kind of captured and funneled Western alienation, which is a very old thing. That's not a new thing.
That's definitely not new.
It's nothing new. The fundamental reasons behind it have not changed over the years. And so back in my first political memories, honestly, growing up in the 1980s in BC, was I had family members who were quite politically active, and I remember finding pamphlets for the Reform Party mailed to my house. And so I remember reading them. That kind of that probably formed me politically Well, maybe I've always kind of leaned.
Hey, Jeff, you're covering up your microphone there.
Oh, am I?
Yeah,
My apologies.
yeah, that's all good. Keep going.
Oh, so yeah, some of my earliest memories were these Reform Party pamphlets coming into the house, and that was back in the late '80s. They eventually they the Reform Party became so influential in Western Canada that it wound up splitting the vote, and with the reigning Conservative Party, which was formed in that they had formed the national government at the time under Brian Mulroney. Essentially, what happened was that Mulroney, like all successful Conservative politicians in Canada, managed to form some kind of an alliance between Western populists and Quebec nationalists. And but keeping those two horses going in the same direction has always been extremely difficult for conservative politicians. And so, in order to try to keep the Quebec wing of his federation happy, Mulroney was giving concessions to Quebec, things like fighter maintenance contracts, and that greatly angered the Western base out here, and they left the Progressive Conservative Party for the Reform movement. And that shattered the Progressive Conservative Party as a political force, reduced them to 2 seats in, I think it was the '92 election. Um, so the Reform Party formed the official, well, they didn't form the official opposition right away, but they did the next election, and the vote stayed split until the modern Conservative Party kind of reunited those wings a little bit, brought most of the Western Canadian um, populists back into the Conservative fold, and that was part of Stephen Harper's coalition for 3 successful elections. All that to say, evangelical personalities have been at the head of populist movements here in Western Canada. I think people in Eastern Canada have found it easy to look at those evangelical leaders and then generalize from those leaders to the regions like Western Canada, Alberta in particular, and say, okay, we're a hotbed of evangelical fervor, when in reality, it's more populism than evangelicalism driving those things. It just happened to be evangelicals at the helm because evangelicals have a theological tradition of getting involved in this stuff.
Right, and so I find that I found your study fascinating, and give yourself some credit that it was, you might not be a scholar, but I found your research and how you laid out the arguments quite well done, and which is why I wanted to have you on the show. What I wanted to ask you as a pastor, did you find your study to be good news or bad news?
Clarifying. Bad news in some ways, I'd say, because the Bible Belt reputation has made evangelicals in my region here in Western Canada rather complacent, and as a result, I think the massive cultural changes that have hit all Western societies, and that includes here in Alberta, they I don't think evangelicals here in Western Canada may have been as effective as they could have been. Having political influence as they traditionally have in the United States, that's been the case here in Alberta and in Western Canada. Having that influence kind of gave us a false sense of security and maybe contributed to some complacency. And I think in that sense, the example of the loss of social conservative influence upon the broader conservative movement in Canada, and particularly the loss of evangelical influence on that here in Canada, will be a very useful lesson for evangelicals in the United States, I think, because they're several years behind us in this regard. But I see evangelicals in the U.S. tracking in basically it's the same sort of trajectory and pattern. So while in the long term, I think it's good for the evangelical church in general because it's clarifying. It makes for a more, I guess you could call it a purer church, or a church that has a clearer mission, more clearly understands itself as something distinct from the world around it, that's a good thing for our ministry. It does mean that we are rather less prepared to make the evangelical and apologetic arguments to the rest of our culture that we should have been. So I don't know if that helped, if that's understandable, but
yeah, perfectly. You know what? It is one of those things where it's I think it was good news, bad news, right?
yeah,
Great news in that it made it very clear for those evangelicals, like you said, pastors and whatnot, that they could now take your study and go forth and show their congregations that the mission field is right outside our own doors. We don't have to go anywhere to share the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The field is plenty right where we are at. So bad news, of course, is that, boy, wouldn't it be nice if we actually lived in the Bible Belt, you know?
it would be nice, but larger story, the larger story of church history has tended to, Christendom has always been more of an ideal than a reality.
Yeah,
So,
precisely. One more question before I let you go. And I have not, just to let you people know, I have not prepped Pastor Jeff here at all with any of these questions. He's done very, very good so far. Let's see how he does with this one. This has to do directly with what's going on with our COVID-19 virus crisis.
okay.
Are churches that do not gather or are not gathering, are they breaking Hebrews 10:24?
Generally, I think no, they're not yet. That's what I would say, yet. Right now I view it as kind of comparable to, we have an extreme blizzard. It's physically unsafe to drive on the roads. Therefore, let's cancel the services for people's physical safety. I think that's where we're at right now. I don't view online services as a long-term solution for the church, but we are blessed to have the technical means at this point in church history that we can maintain some of the fundamental elements of the church. The preaching of the word can still go out. That's one of the fundamentals of the church. There's a form of the fellowship of the saints that can continue. Even Paul himself said that his spirit could be with those who he is writing to, even though he's not there in person. I think that's very meaningful, and that does have an impact on this discussion, because we all have the one spirit, and when we can gather virtually, and the Holy Spirit can be among us. That's my conviction because of those texts. However, we can't adequately perform the ordinances as a church. I would say baptism would be difficult, and the Lord's Supper would be almost impossible. And my concern is that one of the results of this crisis will be that various levels of government in Canada will have more power at the end of it. And we have already seen the direction that our governments are going in terms of using that power. I believe that there will be more restrictions on churches going forward as a result. And I hate to be kind of a Debbie Downer on this, but that's the trajectory our culture is going. And so eventually the physical safety element of this crisis is going to pass. My concern is that if governments try to extend that beyond what the actual medical situation warrants, then we could be truly in a Hebrews 10 situation, and we will be forced to break the law in order to maintain our convictions. That's a long answer, but that's how I'm feeling right now. I don't think we're in sin yet. I think churches that have canceled like ours are right to do so, but we have to continue to evaluate the situation as we go.
It's not a long-term solution.
No.
Exactly. All right. Well, Pastor Jeff, I know you're a busy guy, and I certainly appreciate you taking the time today. And man, I hope to have you on again, as I'm trying to gather those that are smarter than me to espouse on things that
You're looking in the wrong direction.
Well, I don't know. That was great. So I just want to thank you for your time, Pastor, and have a great week. And we'll be praying for you.
Thank you. We need that more than anything.
All right. Thank you,
God bless,
sir.
brother.
You bet.
Bye.
Well, that was great. Didn't expect anything less. Pastor Jeff is one smart dude, and I appreciate his time. Now, where was I? Back to the COVID-19 thing. We'll pop back there. I think I was talking about Donald Trump and his master trolling. Listen, the only major concern I have with any of this really, we don't need to be jerks, right? And as maybe I'm a jerk. I find Trump's trolling of the left hilarious. I wish the left would figure it out. Like, and maybe they have figured it out, but they don't care because it's news. I don't know what their rationale for jumping on Trump every time he uses the Chinese virus or Wuhan virus or whatever he's calling it as a means to jump all over it and call it racist and everything else. This is my issue, is that it gets to a point where people are defending the Chinese government. And yeah, they're going, oh, we're not defending the Chinese government, we're defending the Chinese people. Well, where does one start and the other begin? The Chinese government has lied to the world. We know that. This has been an issue, and they hid it. They have imprisoned their own doctors that tried to get the news out. China is not innocent in this at all. So anytime someone stands up to try to virtue signal about calling the virus, hurting the Chinese people's feelings, good grief, get a grip. And also understand that Trump knows what he's doing. He's trolling you, and just stop it. Don't take the bait. I don't know why people take the bait. It's just, let it go. There's a political aspect to the COVID-19 virus, and Pastor Jeff actually just touched briefly on it. And one of the major concerns, and I think it's a legitimate concern, is that the powers that governments are going to take now, we're just automatically trusting that they're going to rescind those and make them go away. We'll all go back to normal once this is all over. Okay? That is, and those that bring up, well, we're concerned because the government might not do that. Anyone who brings that up seems to be attacked as some conspiracy theory nut. The point of the matter is that it is really only recently in westernized cultures where we haven't had to live with the tyranny of government. The problem is that there are all kinds of places, maybe even majority of places in the world right now where the tyranny of government is normal. And so we quickly grow cold to the idea that we'll experience that here. Why? We're far too sophisticated or something. People are people. And especially in our country, where we have our prime minister who has publicly said that he likes the Chinese way of government. They act quickly. They can do whatever they want in order to enact the ideology that they need to do, and they don't have to bother debating it. They don't have to bother convincing people. They don't have to bother with all that stuff because they're smarter than everyone else, and they can just figure it out and implement it. He's friends, obviously, with Cuba, and this is no secret. So we have that prime minister in charge now, who is now talking, as of this morning, about laying down the law, quite literally, with regards to people staying home. This is not something that most people are. We need to tread lightly, and we need to go into things with our eyes wide open. All right? So, also on the political side of things, I've been paying more attention to our province in Alberta as opposed to nationally across Canada, but there's some things that I'm seeing that is quite troublesome, and it is that there are those both in the NDP and what I would probably call NDP supporters. So I don't want to place it all on the NDP, but between the NDP and their supporters, they are outright attacking the UCP government and making life miserable for the government. And one even had to retract her Twitter statement because she basically used those words. There was another one who's a PhD, not a doctor, not a medical doctor, who was using her platform on Twitter to quite literally drag an MLA and his wife through the mud publicly, which isn't true. Like, she was saying untrue things. She's breaking the law, and I hope that this is remembered. She was also slapped. She was supporting the medical doctors, and other medical doctors jumped on her tweet and retweeted it. It got to the point where the Medical Doctors Society, I don't remember what exactly they're called, actually had to issue a statement going, this is cyberbullying, it's wrong, and we need to be better than that, stop it, right? And so this is the sort of playing politics that drives me crazy in a time like this. There's going to be plenty of time to rip the government once this is passed, okay? And it'll lead me into the next point, which is the conspiracies. For some strange reason, Eric at votewexit.com still is, he retracted his last episode 12, which was a conspiracy theory hoax. And he, in turn, replaced it with another one. And I watched it, and it's almost as painful as the first one. And again, it's a bunch of conspiracy theory nonsense that he's trying to connect dots, but the story's not over yet, and so he can't connect all the dots the way he wants, but he's certainly throwing ideas out there. Oh, just questioning. I'm just asking. Well, how about you wait until you have some facts? How about you wait until all the chips are on the table before you start connecting dots? You're connecting a bunch of dots that may or may not be there. Stop it. Can we keep our eye on the proverbial ball is what I'm asking. So, that is basically all I have to say about COVID-19 for now and the things that I see out there. Can we treat one another better? That's the point. Can we just get all on the same page for a little while and help one another out instead of tearing each other apart? It's pretty depressing. All right, on to the second topic, which is the Alberta separation issue. So this is the idea about being landlocked. So the argument goes, and I've even read it in newspapers. So the idea goes, if Alberta separates, we're in more trouble than ever, because do you think BC is going to want to negotiate with an independent Alberta? Do you think East Coast Canada is going to want to deal with an independent Alberta? You think you're screwed now. Wait till. Well, fair enough. But here's the issue. We're landlocked now. Inside Confederation, we're landlocked now. And inside Confederation, outside of sending Premier Kenney or Premier Notley at the time to beg and plead with the Canadian federal government to please, pretty please allow us to have our ability to get our resources to market. Pretty please. We'll have a carbon tax. We'll do whatever you want in order to negotiate this. And in the end, it still didn't go through. You might want to argue TMX, the pipelines. We'll see how that goes. I think the summer is going to be well, maybe COVID-19 will put a squash to all the blockades that are coming. However, the argument that I would put forward, and many others have as well, I'm not alone in this, is that this changes massively when we separate, or if we separate, okay? We will be in a better bargaining position than we are now. Inside Confederation, we have zero leverage. I was going to say little leverage, but I think in the end, we've really got zero leverage. There's nothing we can do as a province inside Confederation that can solve our issues with regards to approving of the tech mine or approving of any other thing that I have no idea why Ottawa has any say in it in the first place, or why BC can block our pipelines from going through, or Quebec can block our pipelines from going to New Brunswick. It makes no sense. So we're already in a pickle in Confederation. So what could change if we were out of confederation. The argument goes like this. We have major railroads and highways that connect coast to coast. They go through Alberta. If we were to threaten, and that includes our airspace as well, right? If we were to threaten to close those avenues of transportation to the rest of Canada, so West Coast stuff can't get to the east and the East Coast stuff can't get to the west because of what we would call a national blockade, that is going to monetarily hurt Canada. And it's not just a little bit, it's a lot. And to the point where those private companies, especially the railway companies, the trucking companies, anything, the manufacturers that their products aren't getting to market because they're getting blocked coming through Alberta. Do you think those companies are going to stand by and allow that to happen for any length of time? Not a chance. They would put pressure on the Canadian government to get a deal and get a deal done. It's not like they're dealing with unreasonable people, although maybe that's the rumor that we in Alberta are unreasonable. We just want what's right. And it is right that we should be able to get our stuff to market. And it's being blocked. It's being blocked ad nauseum to the point where we have lost billions and billions of dollars of money in Alberta. And not only does that hurt us, it actually hurts Canada, because without that money, we send less money to Ottawa, allegedly. We'll see how that goes. So the idea is that Canada will negotiate in good faith access for our stuff to get to market, and then we in turn, in good faith, would open up our borders to allow rail and highway and airspace to continue. This is a no-brainer. As a nation, we can do that. As a province, we cannot. And that's the only leverage we have. And it's a big stick, but we have to be a nation in order to wield that big stick. All right. The other aspect is it opens up avenues for Alberta. Alberta as a nation could negotiate directly with the United States with regards to access. So we can even bypass the gong show that is British Columbia and their eco-terrorists out there, or the Quebec, your oil is too dirty for us. We like your money, just not your oil, Quebec. We can now not individually, but independently as a nation, the nation of Alberta, we can negotiate directly with the U.S. with regards to access. Whereas right now we have to go through the federal government. And, anytime you've got a federal government in the U.S. that doesn't get along with the federal government of Canada, it's Canada that ends up with the bloody nose. And trust me, we have been the ones with the bloody nose. And so that's how I would answer that simple question. If you've got any further questions with regards to what I've said or comebacks or whatever, I'm more than happy to have a discussion regarding this. Please leave a note underneath the video when it's uploaded. Finally, we are closing in on an hour. I'd like to get this done before the hour mark, but we'll see how it goes. Just closing remarks. It has to do with the last video number 5. I'm a man of integrity, or at least I try to be. And I did say in the video that I would take it down if Vote Wexit took down their episode 12, where he called it a corona hoax and global whatever. They did take it down. Eric did take that one down and replace it with one that was almost as bad as the first one. However, mine's still up. Why is it still up? The reason why it's still up is because I caught the note on Facebook, votewexit.com, on their Facebook page, announced that they pulled the episode 12. But in the explanation, I believe it was Eric that probably gave the explanation, is that the reason why they decided to pull it was because people were misinterpreting the title. There was nothing, basically his entire argument came down to people are too stupid to understand the point I was trying to get across. And that's fine. If you want to pull it for that reason, that's fine. But it's a dumb reason. I'm going to leave the video up to show that it wasn't that people are too stupid to understand the title or understand the dots you were trying to connect. I'm leaving my video up to show that your video was in fact stupid and that it had no place in The number of people that got a hold of me going, I agree 100%. I am not into Wexit in order to espouse conspiracy theories. I have no time for that garbage. And that was the entire point of the video, going, yeah, I get it. That's why the video's there. I'm going to leave the video up because Vote Wexit and Eric did not take responsibility for the poor taste, the poor quality of the video that they put up. It has nothing to do, guys, with the fact that the rest of us idiots can't read. We can read perfectly well. Thank you very much. It was a poorly done video, and we're not going to continue to... well, let me tell you this. I got a hold of Peter Downing on Twitter, where I challenged him outright, publicly, saying, will you distance yourself from this idiotic video? He wrote back... or posted back. What did he do? He retweeted with the comment. And his argument was, we support all those who have who want to question government, and we support free speech. Peter, that wasn't the point. And this is just another example of why Peter Downing is not fit to lead the Wexit party. This is another reason why the movement is going to die if it keeps going in the direction it's going. You're feeding into the exact thing that makes us look like a bunch of uneducated hillbilly rednecks, of which I have no problem being a hillbilly redneck, but I am not uneducated, and I'm not an idiot, and I'm not about to jump on a whole bunch of ill thought out, irrational conspiracy theories that really should have nothing to do with the Wexit movement. My problem, Mr. Downing, is that you allow Vote Wexit that uses the Wexit name in order to promote conspiracy theories, which undermines the very movement we're trying to do. This is irresponsible, and if you don't see that, then you're not the guy to lead us out, period. Again, Vote Wexit. Eric just released another conspiracy theory. He replaced one conspiracy theory with another. I don't know what it is with regards to Vote Wexit. I don't know Eric personally, but why you are sullying or soiling the Wexit movement with conspiracy theories is crazy. Downing, if you're into free speech, then how about this? Here's my conspiracy theory. See if you can go for this. Would it be great if under the Wexit banner, under the Wexit name, I decided to say, you know what, Peter Downing is a federal shill who is undermining the inside movement of the separatist movement in Alberta. He's actually a federal shill placed there. Is that okay? Can I espouse that conspiracy theory with Wexit in the title? With you having, are you okay with that? Of course you're not. So why would you allow something like this, a conspiracy theory guy like Eric, to continue to use the Wexit name? I don't care if it's a third-party votewexit.com. I don't care. Wexit's in the name. It represents you to some degree. It's tying it to you, and it's tying it to the party. And if this is what the party's about, and I've already been told by plenty, if this is what the party's about, we're out. Is that what you're looking for? I would hope not. So how about you distance yourself from Vote Wexit? How about you ask Eric kindly? I have a feeling you know him personally. How about you ask him kindly to stop the silliness? All right? That's all I got today. Thank you for listening. We will be in touch maybe the next couple, 3 days. All right? Take care.